Good morning. If you're new to our event, welcome. If you joined us in past discussions, welcome back to the New York State Youth Justice Institute's Forum on COVID-19 and Youth. My name is Giza Lopez, and I'm the Executive Director of the YJI. We have an incredibly diverse audience here today. Many of you come from local and state governments all over the country, as well as universities, nonprofits, and research centers from near and far. Thank you very, very, very much for joining us and for your endurance in coping with yet another Zoom meeting. As always, if you have any tech problems during today's event, please email us at youthjustice@albany.edu. And if you have comments or resources you'd like to share, please post them on our online virtual board. The link for our board should appear on the chat box any minute now. We have another exciting day ahead of us and a very tight agenda, so let's jump right in. We at the New York State Youth Justice Institute are great admirers of the mission and of the work of the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University. Their commitment to research and leadership development in youth justice is evident, it is effective, and it is known worldwide. We were absolutely delighted when Michael Umpierre, director of the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform, accepted our invitation to join this event as our plenary speaker. Michael has dedicated his career to improving the lives of youth, particularly those who are most in need. He has a wealth of experience as a juvenile justice administrator, national trainer and consultant, public defender, and youth advocate. His previous experience includes serving as the Chief of Staff of the District of Columbia's Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, Program Coordinator of the National Center for Youth in Custody, and trial attorney at the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia. He has also worked at several youth advocacy organizations, including the Youth Law Center and the Pacific Juvenile Defender Center. At the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform, Michael works to support and educate leaders across all systems to improve outcomes for juveniles. Michael's many roles include managing the center's Youth in Custody Practice Model Initiative, coordinating the Juvenile Justice Leadership Network, and serving as an instructor in various CJJR certificate programs, among much, much else. Michael received a BA in Public Policy from Stanford University and a JD from Yale Law School, and he is a recipient of the prestigious John Gardner Public Service Fellowship and Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans. Please join me in a virtual round of applause to welcome our plenary speaker, Michael Umpierre. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Giza, for that very kind introduction. I want to thank you and the entire New York State Youth Justice Institute team for all of your efforts in convening this wonderful forum and for the opportunity to speak with you all today. As Giza mentioned, my name is Michael Umpierre, and I'm the director of the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. Our mission at CJJR is to improve the lives of children and families who touch or are at risk of touching the justice system. And we do this through a combination of dynamic training programs for system leaders and partners that we host on the Georgetown campus and in the field, as well as through a number of site-based practice models, programs, and initiatives. Our goal is to build and support a field of leaders who are dedicated to improving outcomes for kids, for families, and communities. I speak with you today, admittedly, with a heavy heart. These past few months and weeks and days have been extraordinarily challenging. As this forum has explored throughout the course of this week, the COVID-19 crisis has had profound impacts on all of us, including and especially on our country's most vulnerable youth and families. Individuals have suffered tragic loss and grief. They've lost their jobs. They've experienced incredible stress and anxiety. Families have faced food and housing insecurity and the inability to access adequate health care. Many parents have had to navigate the challenges of working from home, at least those still fortunate to maintain employment during this time. And in many communities, young people have had to shift from in-person school-based education to less than dynamic distance learning, requiring access to technology and the internet, not to mention a lack of access to important pro-social activity, whether it's in the realm of the arts or sports or community service or so forth. In my view, the hallmark of this pandemic has been distance and separation and disconnectedness from others. Indeed, I am speaking to you today from my home in Washington, D.C., and I imagine that many of you are listening and watching from your respective homes as well. For many, this feeling of separation and isolation from others has only been exacerbated and intensified in the wake of recent events. The tragic and unnecessary deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, and others, as well as the resulting protests all around the United States, have demonstrated a sharp divide between community members and the systems that are supposed to serve and protect them. While these events are just a recent sample of the pain and the loss that communities of color regularly endure, they reflect a long history of injustice that must be addressed. In short, at this moment, our country feels as divided and disconnected as ever, and it is the youth and families that we all serve who bear a significant portion of that burden and hardship. So what do we do? How do we respond? In the face of COVID-19 and racial injustice, how do we ensure that young people and families receive the support that they so desperately need and deserve? Well, I will not profess to know all of the answers, but I will say this. When it comes to advancing positive youth development and supporting families, whether in times of normalcy or distress, research and experience teach us that one of the most important things that we can do is to promote positive connections. Positive connections between youth and family, positive connections between youth and pro-social adults and peers, and positive connections to those who can provide vital opportunities and services to meet the most basic needs of youth and families. Now, by calling for unity and a return to interpersonal connections, I'm not suggesting that we should disregard the sage advice of our fellow medical professionals in terms of physical or social distancing to combat the spread of COVID-19. I say this as someone married to a physician, an OBGYN who has been on the front lines right here in Washington, D.C., serving pregnant women, including many of whom have tested positive for the virus. But what I am saying is that in the face of this global health crisis and in the face of this moral crisis, we should be using our creativity and our innovative thinking to find ways to help youth and families forge meaningful, positive connections with one another. Positive connections with the staff who operate the systems that serve them, including the justice system, child welfare, education, medical, behavioral health, law enforcement, and the courts. And positive connections to community-based providers and organizations and to the community at large. In our work at Georgetown, we focus our efforts around certain core values and guiding principles that permeate everything that we do. And I want to share with you 3 of these principles today, all of which have been beautifully explored and elevated by the speakers in this forum over the course of this week. These principles are by no means an exhaustive list, but I believe that they provide a useful framework for the types of conversations we should be having as we chart our path forward through these challenging times. The first is that central to all of our work must be a relentless commitment to achieving equity and fairness. We all must recognize that in practically every domain, whether it's health, justice, or child welfare, youth and families of color face disparate treatment compared to their white counterparts. We know, for example, that youth in the juvenile justice system receive harsher treatment than white youth at every critical systemic decision point, whether it's arrest, referral to court, detention, charging, adjudication, disposition. And while there have been significant advancements over the years, including a precipitous decline in the overall number of young people in custody nationally over the past 2 decades, the data tell us that it's white youth who have benefited most from these developments. Overcoming the challenges presented by long-standing and ingrained systemic and structural racism is undoubtedly a difficult proposition. But there are things that we can do. A commitment to equity and fairness should be at the forefront of the agenda of any organization or system that serves youth and families. We should be having the conversation about equity regularly and in partnership with the people most impacted, listening to and learning from one another in order to earn the trust of communities who have been marginalized and repeatedly failed by the system for far too long. We should be collecting data on disparities at key decision points in the system and using that data to identify both root causes of the disparities and solutions to eliminate them. We should be using evidence-based and race-neutral tools to support objective decision-making. And we should be regularly training all individuals who work with kids and families, especially system staff, on implicit bias and cultural responsiveness. In my view, focusing on equity and fairness is not just the right thing to do, but it's a strategy that leads to better outcomes. For example, from the body of research related to procedural due process, we know that if young people believe that the system has treated them fairly, they're much more likely to build positive relationships with system officials, accept the consequences of their actions, and engage in the types of services and programs that we know can make all the difference in their lives. The second principle that I want to lift up today is that we must focus on advancing developmentally appropriate approaches for youth, recognizing the research on the adolescent brain and socio-emotional development that illustrates the key differences between youth and adults. We should be doing everything that we can to support young people to transition into adulthood successfully. And for me, one of the most central things that we can be doing to promote positive youth development is to connect youth to caring, pro-social individuals. Time and again, research demonstrates the vital importance of these connections. We know that establishing a sense of belonging is a fundamental task of adolescent development, one that facilitates skill development, a sense of identity, a sense of purpose. And perhaps the most powerful body of research in this regard, or arguably the most relevant in times of COVID-19, given the stress and anxiety that young people are facing, relates to the study of youth resilience. That is, young people's ability to respond to adversity and thrive nevertheless. Years ago, the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, a multidisciplinary effort out of Harvard, conducted a scan of international studies in order to understand the factors that contribute to youth resilience. In essence, they wanted to know what it was about those young people who emerged from the most challenging situations that allowed them to achieve positive outcomes nevertheless. And so this group reviewed these studies on young people who thrived despite living in the most difficult environments and the most difficult experiences. Young people who lived in war-torn areas, who'd been exposed to trauma and victimization, who had suffered from significant abuse and neglect. And after reviewing this literature, their conclusion was both fascinating and it was profound. They found that the single most common factor for children who developed resilience in the face of adversity was that they had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. In the face of COVID-19 and recent events, where stress and anxiety levels are high, and where many youth and families are experiencing trauma, we should not take this research lightly. We must redouble our efforts to ensure that every youth is connected to a support network that they can lean on. And yes, for many youth, this means supporting connections to their parents, to their siblings, to their immediate family. And when we do this, we must treat youth and families holistically, making sure that they can access services to meet their basic needs without having to resort to the justice system or the child welfare system to do so. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly provided challenges in this respect, but as we've explored through the course of this week, there are glimmers of hope as well that we can build upon and should build upon, including how community-based providers across the country are using technology and creativity to support telemedicine, counseling, linkages to SNAP, and other essential benefits during this time. As part of this effort, however, we should not limit ourselves to the traditional definition of family. Young people come from a wide variety of family backgrounds and structures. And so if we do not work to identify the full gamut of supporters in the young person's life, not just those who are related by blood or through marriage, but other supporters like teachers, mentors, clergy members, credible messengers, peers, and other fictive kin, we're missing a major opportunity. And finally, for those young people involved in the justice system, facilitating strong connections to pro-social supports means doing everything that we can to safely keep kids in their homes and in their communities. As discussed throughout this forum, this pandemic has shown us that changing our reliance on juvenile detention is possible. A recent survey by the Annie E. Casey Foundation indicated a 52% decline in juvenile detention admissions nationally over the last 2 months, equaling the rate of decline that previously took 13 years to accomplish. In order to sustain this progress, we must continue to engage and support families and supporters of system-involved youth in meaningful ways, in our case planning, in our service delivery. And for those young people who remain in custody in residential facilities away from their homes and their families, it also means that we're working hand in hand with families and supporters to keep them connected to their children and to prepare them for a seamless return to the community. The third and final principle that I want to elevate today is that when it comes to systemic change, and so much of what we've been talking about through the course of this week is about how do we change the systems. We cannot do that. We cannot improve the way that we serve young people and families without truly partnering with youth and families themselves. Throughout the course of this forum, we've heard the mantra of nothing about us without us. And that is exactly right. Young people and families are the true experts, and it's incumbent on all of us to ensure that we're elevating the voices of those with lived experience when we're trying to improve the system. As we examine our current practices and approaches in light of COVID-19, and we identify new and creative ways of doing business, we should be doing that in collaboration with youth and families. And there are several strategies that communities are implementing right now as we speak in the face of this pandemic that we can build upon. Partnering with youth and family councils and youth and family advocacy organizations composed of individuals with lived experience in order to examine and enhance policy and practice. Conducting surveys and focus groups of youth and families, employing youth and family liaisons to provide support and serve as advisors, as well as countless other strategies. However we proceed, we must be mindful of the need to partner with youth and families in truly meaningful and supportive ways. Similar to our work in the context of race equity, we must work diligently to earn the trust of youth and families, making sure that we avoid perpetuating feelings of tokenism or system manipulation. The road ahead of us will without a doubt be one that's bumpy and long-winding. But as we go down this road, let us be guided by values and principles that transcend time, that transcend politics, that transcend changes in leadership, and transcend crises of the moment. And to close, I want to share with you the words of two inspirational individuals who've left an indelible mark on our world and who understood the interconnectedness of all human beings. The first quote is from none other than Albert Einstein. He said, "Strange is our situation here upon earth. Each of us comes for a short visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to a divine purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing we do know, that we are here for the sake of others. Above all, for those upon whose smile and well-being our own happiness depends, for the countless unknown souls with whose fate we are connected by a bond of sympathy." The second quote is from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose foresight and vision, in my view, are needed today more than ever. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." During these challenging and controversial times, where we grapple with the disconnectedness and the division created by COVID-19 and the pain of racial injustice in America, let us all come together in unity and continue to work tirelessly to improve the lives of all youth and families. They deserve nothing less.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your thoughtful, meaningful, and powerful remarks. Thank you for creating space to acknowledge the pain and the loss that communities of color and, frankly, all of us as human beings are going through right now. I appreciated that throughout you maintained a positive outlook and called upon us to reconnect with the critical role of positive connections at this point in time. Thank you for that. Thank you also for charging us, which is the role of a great plenary speaker, with reconnecting with our commitment to equity and fairness, to meaningfully engage with the voices of those most affected, for engaging data in the path moving forward, and to take into account developmentally appropriate approaches, and challenging us at the end of the day to face our own implicit biases. This was a very powerful message, and I thank you so much, Michael, for your time here today and for what you had to say. Thank you.
Thank you.